We've forgotten that there's a God that we have to answer.
Dealing with people who reject truth.
I'm wondering in my mind why life is so difficult for me.
340 million people who are suffering.
Real stories.
Here's a man who's responsible for almost 7 billion people.
Real issues.
How much does peer pressure actually exist?
And real views.
Gangs exist at every level.
This is Real Talk.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Real Talk USA. I'm your host Momin Bhatti, and today we're speaking with friends who've joined the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. We'll discuss how they learned about the true Islam, why they converted, and life now as an Ahmadi Muslim. Let's meet our guests. First we have Jason Elsey. He was born and raised Catholic and converted in June 2010. He owns a puzzle and toys retail store in Columbus, Ohio. He's also the local Jama'at Public Affairs Secretary over there. Next is Hassan Hakim from Waukegan, Illinois, who joined Ahmadiyyat in 1967. He's president of Zion Jama'at and the National Publications Secretary. And finally, we have Hamza Ilyas from Brooklyn, New York, who converted on June 2nd, 2004. Today is actually the second-year anniversary of his acceptance of his wasiyat. Congratulations on that. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I also want to thank our studio audience for joining us in today's conversation. You know, there's so much to talk about, so many unique and fascinating stories. Each of you has very interesting backgrounds that are similar in some respects to each other, but different in very unique ways. Let's start with Brother Hakim. How did you find out about Ahmadiyyat?
Actually, in our area, in Waukegan, Illinois, we're very close to Milwaukee. There's Brother Rashid Ahmed, American as they refer to him. He always had tabligh teams. We didn't call them tabligh teams, but they actually were tabligh teams that were working in the area, just talking to people. At that time, there was no mosque, there was no place to meet. So many of these brothers, as we say back in the day, they would just walk up to people on the street and start talking to them about Ahmadiyyat. That's how I was introduced to Ahmadiyyat, virtually by someone walking up to me on the street and just engaged me.
And back in the day, you say back in the day, that was 1967.
Yes.
So if my math is correct, that makes you 19 years old when you accepted it.
I was 19 at the time. I have a sister who was older than me. She had accepted Ahmadiyyat. I also had a brother who was 11 months older than me. He had accepted Ahmadiyyat, but that was not the reason that I accepted Ahmadiyyat, because as my brother, there was always a little sibling rivalry in the family. But I did hear him talk about Islam. I was always attracted to Islam, not so much Ahmadiyyat.
And Brother Elsey, you actually became Ahmadi very recently. Talk about how you found out. Last June was when you became.
Yeah, when I converted and signed the bet. My journey was different. It wasn't 1967. That was a few years prior to me being born. So my journey, I ran into a young Ahmadi woman from out in Austin, Texas, during a business conference. I asked her about her headscarf. You know, I was curious, so I wanted to know. And she said, I wear it because God tells me to. And I go, really? I said, it's 90 degrees. She goes, yeah, but this is part of what I believe, and this is a small thing that I can do for God. I go, really? So that weekend is when I started to learn more about Ahmadiyya and Islam and all of those things, and everything that she had to say made sense to me. And believing in the prophets and believing in the followers of the books, it just made sense, and that's what really started it off, and that was over almost 2 years ago. So,
Brother Ilyas, how is your journey similar or different? Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you find out about Ahmadiyyat?
Actually, there was a gentleman on my job. I was researching into the Quran. I had just accepted Sunni Islam, maybe about a month or two prior. And so I was researching a little bit more into the Quran, trying to learn a little bit more about Islam. And there was a gentleman at my job who was a Muslim. So I asked him some question I can't remember. And he says, well, I don't know, but there's another brother that I do know who works for the same firm, and if you look him up on the internal phone directory, then he could probably answer your question. And so I looked him up and I found him, and I called him up, and we started talking, and he brought me to the mosque. And it turns out that the first brother, whose name was Muhammad Malik, he actually was an Ahmadi, and he was a colleague of mine. And so the other gentleman that he referred me to also was an Ahmadi, so the mosque that they brought me to was an Ahmadi mosque, and I just started to observe the people, and that's how I got introduced to Ahmadiyya.
How long before your realization of Ahmadiyyat and the time that you accepted Ahmadiyyat and signed the Bai'at form?
I would say it was a very good question that you asked, because I never thought about that. But I would say that had to have been about 2 months.
Okay. So not long at all.
No.
Whereas, you know, everybody has a different time length, and it could be several years for somebody, it could be a lot shorter time. 2 months, you knew what, right away, or what happened within those 2 months?
Well, this is an interesting question. This part I have thought about before. The reason is because in our discussion, he never really discussed Ahmadiyya. And so I didn't really know about the promised Messiah, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian. It was really more of an insight that I think that God had given me, in the sense of there was a perception there. I had been around over the previous 1 or 2 months going, or maybe 3 months, going around to different non-Ahmadi mosques. And so when he invited me over to the mosque, which was in Queens, New York, just by observing the people, there was a certain lightness of heart that I felt. And so observing them, they seemed different from the other Muslims. So on that basis alone, I was attracted to that particular community. And so in short, one morning I just woke up. I had been there maybe 2 or 3 times. And one morning I just woke up and I had a very distinct feeling. This part I remember very much so. I had a very distinct feeling that I could not continue to just simply go there, that there was something that I had to do to be a part of that community. So I called up the gentleman, Ghulam Rabi, and he says, "That's funny, I was just about to call you. Why not come down and we'll make prayer," and so forth. And I said, okay. So I went down there and we made Isha prayer, the latest night prayer. And right after that, he says, "Oh, let's go up to the library." And we went up there. And so I was very happy that this happened, because I wanted to ask him, what is it that I, need to do? Or is there some process to be part, to continue to come here to this mosque? But little did I know that he had invited me up to the library so that he could present to me and explain to me the Bai'at form. So I only mention this part because for the next 15 minutes, we sat there in that library with me insisting that I needed to know what I needed to do to be a part of this community, and with him across the table from us, insisting on giving him a chance to explain as he had the papers there. And so when I finally noticed, and this is after a few minutes of us going back and forth, that he had some papers, I realized that maybe he needed me to sign something. So I took the papers from him, I glanced at it, and I signed it, and that's how I came in.
I'm actually going to stop you right there because I want to hear more about that in our second part of, after you signed that Bai'at form, what it felt like for you. But Mr. Hakim, did you have a similar experience? Was it right away, or was it?
Not at all. Okay. You see, for us, mainly for myself as a teenager in America, I've always been an activist. So I was always involved in community activism. I was involved in politics of the day. And for me, my heroes at that time were people like Muhammad Ali, the boxer. That was some of the first contact I had with Islam. And if you remember, well, most of you will not remember, but history in 1963, it was a very difficult time for the nation. We were going through the Vietnam War. I had evaded the draft twice, and I very much followed what Muhammad Ali said. He said, "I don't have any fight with those yellow people," and I felt the same way. And I also was a follower of Malcolm X. I was very much attracted to the teachings of Malcolm X, but I never became a black Muslim. I was not attracted to the black Muslim philosophy. So the people that I had contact with were mainly Ahmadis. They were always in the fringe area, but they were not as active in the community because they were so busy preaching Islam. And I kept wondering, who are these people? Why are they bothering me with this thing they call Ahmadiyya? So then I began to talk to more people, and that was the first real contact that I had with Ahmadiyya. So imagine I was just a teenager at the time. But as a teenager, I always was in leadership positions. If it was the little local group of guys that were playing basketball, I was the leader. If we were doing anything in the neighborhood, I was the leader. So when I accepted Ahmadiyya, finally, all those that were with me, almost like in an African village. In an African village, you have a chief. The chief accepts Ahmadiyya. All the people become Ahmadis. So in my capacity as the chief in that little area, all my friends accepted Ahmadiyya.
But what attracted you to that message of Ahmadiyya?
There is nothing that really attracted me to the message. It was Islam, period. I enjoyed that atmosphere of Islam, the same thing that Malcolm X saw. And what Malcolm X saw was people coming from various nations, none unlike Christianity, because for us, Christianity merely meant that Sunday was the most racist day in America. The white folks went to the white churches and the black folks went to the black churches. Ahmadiyya, that message of Islam that I saw, had whites, it had blacks, it had Asians. That's the thing that really attracted me to Ahmadiyya, when I started seeing that. And finally going to meetings and for the first time seeing Pakistanis. I had never met any Pakistanis. And they were all very gentle, good people. They welcomed me. That spirit touched me in my heart, and that's how I accepted Ahmadiyya.
The message of unity and diversity.
Yes, exactly.
Mr. Elsie, my understanding is for you, it was about a year, within a year, after finding out about Ahmadiyya and learning about it, within a year you signed the Ba'ath form very recently.
Yeah, it was within about 10 months or so of me being exposed to Ahmadiyya and told a few things. I started to research it after my holiday season, which was September to January. I opened up a bunch of stores. And everything continually made sense. And the clicker was one of my employees. He brought up and he said, you seem like the kind of guy that likes to jump into things before you really look around. He said, I'd watch what you do and who you spend time with. I said, you know what? You're exactly right. Why am I on the outside of this when I can actually become a part of it and learn everything there is rather than look from the outside and try to figure everything out? So that's what I did. Within that week of having that discussion with that particular employee, I went and signed the Ba'ath.
Yeah. And what's interesting, when you say that, some people might hear that and run away from something that's different and something that you're still learning about, but you jumped right in.
Yeah, so when you get to certain points in your life, you kind of look back and you see that you've created patterns, and whether it was you creating them or Allah, you try and put those together. And what I had always done ever since being younger, I would dive headfirst into things and then kind of see where I am and then go from there. So I figured, why change at this point in my life? So.
Yeah, very interesting. I'd like to take it now to our audience who may have questions and comments already. We have such a fascinating journey that we're talking about already. So let's see if anybody has any comment. Yes?
The brief story that you stated about when you learned about Islam and Ahmadiyya. But was there some tipping point for you that really made you believe, or something that pushed you over? We've heard those stories many times. So
there was no real defining moment. There was nothing, no bright light, nothing clicked in my head. What it was is that I saw the example of those who had accepted Ahmadiyya, and I was really impressed with the people who accepted Ahmadiyya in the area, just their character. And I kept saying to myself, my God, I want to be like that. Because I had gone through a very tough period as a black nationalist, where I had come to the conclusion that I didn't want to be around white people. I did not want to be a part of America. Everything was against my country, and my belief system was totally abstract at that time, because you have to remember, I was just a teenager. What did I know? But now, somehow or other, Allah Ta'ala opened some doors for me through Ahmadiyya with these individuals who had accepted Ahmadiyya, and I was always watching them. And again, I repeat, that those people that I came in contact with from different countries who are mainly Pakistanis. They were very impressive to me that they left their country to come to America, to grow up in our country, and that these African Americans had learned their Islam from these Pakistanis. So that was very impressive to me. It gave me a sense of family, a sense of community that I always desired.
You know, that's an interesting point. You know, maybe I'll take that to the audience of you saw the character of the members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Absolutely.
So, you know, what do you guys think of that as members? You know, when you see that, you know, somebody who might be interested in learning more, you know, they're probably looking at your character, at how you approach them, you know, and all.
If I may, let me just add this little tidbit. There was a young man that I met from the Shams family in Zion. His name is Falauddin Shams. Do you know him? Falauddin Shams would come to our house, my mother's house. My mother is an income tax consultant. Falauddin Shams didn't know anyone. He could barely speak English properly. But he came and he worked with my mother very closely, and we got to know Falauddin Shams so that he became a brother to me in that household. To the point, to this very day, I still work with Falauddin Shams on the Muslim Sunrise very closely because we know each other. We have a love for each other. So therefore, all the little differences that may exist, cultural differences, they don't mean a thing. We're just Ahmadis.
So does anybody have a comment on the character, of our lifestyle and all that playing a factor? Yep, Farad?
What Hassan Akim Saab just mentioned, that love that we have, there's no difference between us, whether it's racial or whatever else there is. It's that love that we all share, and that fact that we're just that one big family. That's the thing that people look at, and that's what attracts people. The message is always there, but the thing that we're a family, and that's what makes us so strong, and that's what makes our message so strong, how we present ourselves to the public, which is being that family.
Right. To basically live Islam.
Live Islam.
Right. So.
Do you think that often some of the youth maybe, or folks as Ahmadis confuse that very subtle but very important point, which is the character and really your daily life reflecting Ahmadiyyat as opposed to the kind of preaching outwards. And preaching outwards is important to make yourself known, but kind of not solely depending on that, also reforming your character.
I think you've hit it right on the head, is not concentrate so much on the preaching as to concentrate on who you are, not only as an Ahmadi, but who you are as an American. I think that the young people of today, the young Ahmadis, are doing a pretty good job. I mean, after all, you guys are now whooping African Americans at basketball, which I can't hardly believe, but my God, that's how you've got to work your way into the society. You've got to be very much involved with your brothers and and the sisters with those sisters in Ahmadiyya. These cultural problems that come from Pakistan or Africa or wherever you come from, they're very small things. People concentrate too much on these little cultural things, the food, the language. You know, at the end of the day, it really doesn't mean that much. I want to know who you are as my brother.
Let's talk a little bit about whether there were any obstacles in your journeys, in finding that peace that is in Islam and Ahmadiyyat. Brother Ilyas, Mr. Ilyas, we'll start with you. Was it an easy thing, or were there any sort of obstacles that happened because of your acceptance of Ahmadiyyat?
You know, anytime you change your belief system, which affects your behavior, outward behavior, inward behavior, but we'll say outward behavior, your way of life, then those who were previously attached to your outward behavior, right, meaning that birds of a feather flock together up until that point, up until the point that you converted or diverted from your previous practice or way of life, the first thing that happens is everyone notices a change, right? So then the first thing is to talk you out of it or to make comments, to bring you back, as it were, into the fold. And then the second is, depending on the group of people, the second is to take stronger measures, not realizing that they're going to distance you more. So I think that for me, some of the obstacles were really that there were family obstacles, there were friend obstacles in the sense that, you know, I lived, you know, very much a worldly, you know, lifestyle. And so I think people were surprised, going not on what Islam actually is, but on what they perceived it to be. But really more so as like, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, or you don't do that anymore. So it was really that surprise, not the benefit or detriment of doing this or not doing that actually is. So what ends up happening is you then become a mirror, because what I did put a stop to some of the habits that I had or some of the choices I would have previously made among people who felt happy at making those choices, having never reflected over them before. So this then was the parting of ways. For example, you know, part of a worldly lifestyle is going to, you know, bars or lounges or clubs of this sort of thing. And so I stopped doing that. And so now you're not part of the crowd that's going to these places, family and friends. You know, even your way of speaking, you know, you're now not part of those things. So what ends up happening is, I think some of the obstacles that I faced was that even down to the choices and the tolerance of someone who has a different belief system or is into different things then becomes clear. Because it really became clear that, you see, you may come around me and you have a certain lifestyle, and I may tolerate it, having an understanding that that's who you are, where you are. But I think what ends up happening is that what became displayed was that the tolerance level of people who are seeing someone now converted to Islam, which is a fairly misunderstood way of life or religion, people then began to say, well, why are you into that? And I think it made them upset because they really couldn't understand. And so some of the obstacles that happen is sometimes they took a harsh line, like, you know, we mentioned earlier, it got to such a point where, you know, sometimes some family members felt that, well, you know, you can't be here if this is what you're going to be into. In fact, I was at a family member's house in this very state, in Maryland. In fact, this weekend, the weekend of May 14th, just last year, visiting family members. And they flat out told me to leave their house and to, you know, mention what Hakeem said. Actually, I called here, the mosque, Baitur Rahman, and it was here that I came. And I learned yet another lesson. When my family, my blood family put me out, it was my spiritual family that took me in. And literally on May 14th, 2010, is when I was put out at 11 o'clock at night. I was a little bit further away, is it Glen Burnie, and all I could see was trees and grass. And so I just resigned myself that this is what His Majesty God has decided. And so I have heard the stories of the people who sleep in the grass and it doesn't look too bad, and I can see the stars so it isn't raining outside. And it was around this time of year, so about 65 degrees. And I went and I slept there in the grass for the night. And a few hours later in the morning, about 5 or 6 a.m., I called over to here, and I got another one of my friends to pick me up where I was, and we drove the 25 or 30 minutes, and he dropped me off here. So there is a tolerance in the sense of they're doing this because they don't understand.
My experience is a little different, and everything he's saying is so true, and he very eloquently laid it out. Mine was very, very simple. When we accepted Islam, Ahmadiyya, families did turn against us. It was very harsh, leading a life where you couldn't have any social relationship with some family members because of Ahmadiyya. But my mother was a Christian, my father was a Christian, were very supportive. My mother just said, you can be anything you want to be, long as you be just that. So when you change your name from the Christian name to Hassan Hakeem, that really throws them. That does it. We actually, and we were very proud back in the day, we were very proud to go into a courtroom and change our names. And I'll never forget the judge saying to me, says, look, man, why you want to change your name? What's going on here? Are you a thief? are you trying to hide? And I said, no, I want to change my name because this is part of my faith. He says, I don't believe. This is the judge talking. I don't believe that. And I looked him dead in his eye, and of course that rage started coming out. And I said, well, you know, John Wayne changed his name, and he didn't seem to have a problem with it. And with that, he shut up, stamped the papers, and I've been Hassan Hakim ever since. And that change of name really throws people. They always want to call you by the Christian name, which we stop them. And then this is very curious to me because back in the day, we were so proud of our names, we wouldn't let anyone call us by a nickname. I could never be Haas or Hakim or whatever I can't pronounce Hakim, but I'm going to call, no, you are going to call me by my name. So it's really curious to me to see young Ahmadis today, especially Pakistanis, who take on nicknames. I find that very, very curious, how we struggled and we fought to have these very wonderful names, these attributes of God as our name that we fought for and we protected. To hear a young Ahmadi today being called Bob, whose real name is Bilal, it's like a throwback to me, and I don't understand it. So for my parents, they accepted it. They let us live this faith that we wanted to live, but many of our relatives, as he was saying, did not accept it. Of course, I didn't get booted out into the woods like certain people, but it's quite an experience.
All right. Let's take it to our audience to see if there's any questions or comments about these fascinating stories that we're hearing today. If anybody has any comment, yes.
Yes, I want to go back to the discussion that Brother Hamza brought up, and any one of you can respond to this. When you converted, it was a conscious decision on your part. Most of us who are born Ahmadis, we don't go through that conscious decision. And you're just like us. You live the same life, you go to work, and you're just like us. So I was wondering, what are those special qualities in you that made you see that truth of Islam, which we can also acquire? Because as a matter of fact, if we're not paying attention to the true message of Islam and Ahmadiyya, it doesn't matter who we are as born Ahmadis or not. So I wanted to know, what are those qualities that you had, and we can also have, as we are similar?
There's only one answer to your question, and it is actually the basis of all religion. La ilaha illallah. I'm nobody. He's nobody. He's nobody. None of you are anybody. So I actually have no special qualities. I understand your question. I know how you're putting it. But the reality is that Allah the Exalted himself has answered this in the Quran. He says, say to the Arabs of the desert, you know, don't call yourselves believers. Say that you have submitted, right? So when someone makes a conscious decision to submit to any belief system, to subscribe to any belief system, any set of actions, right, then this is their choice. But for the first thing, it is in terms of the embracing of Islam. You'll notice that all throughout the Quran, God says that it is He who opens up someone's heart for the acceptance of Islam. So it wasn't me. The truth of the matter is, when I go back and I look in my library, some of the books that my father had, some of the books I may have acquired, it's amazing how in some of these books, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, the promised Messiah, Imam Mahdi, or Ahmadiyya, is mentioned in these very books, and these are books I've had with me for a lifetime. How did I not see it then? Why do I see it now? It is because God himself opened up my heart to see it. So what happens is, this is the first thing and the most important thing. It's actually God. It's him. You know, they say man's faith lies between the two fingers of Allah's hands. He turns it this way, a man believes. He turns it this way, a man disbelieves, right? So this is a God. This is a favor. So, but now your question is designed to say, well, what choice can we make that would take us to the point where we can then believe, right? The first thing is to remember your Lord. It's gratefulness. So here you are, sitting in a chair with a microphone in your hand. You're asking questions. Your car is outside, or maybe some friend gave you a ride. He says, how can you disbelieve in him when he gave you life, when you had no life? And then he will cause you to die, and then to him will be the return. So you will have to return to your Lord. And I know for me, this is the verse, in fact, that when my eyes fell upon this verse in this book I never heard of, or this language and religion and whatnot, and that it shocked me, because then it was the remembrance of that reality. It was the remembrance that life is so full of struggle, pain, trials, challenges, jobs come, jobs go. Family comes and family goes. Loved ones and friends come and go. What really do you have? You have nothing. But if God is your friend and you know of God, then this is all that you need. So to become a Muslim or to subscribe to any faith means, in fact, to give up your desires and to follow guidance. You wouldn't walk through the woods at night with no lantern, picking firewood. How do you know that that stick you're picking up is not a poisonous snake? So the thing is to save your life. So happiness, true comfort comes from God. So remember God, and then think about, he is my friend because he does more for me than my best friends do, and he's even better than my mother, even if I had 100 mothers. So am I his friend? That is the question.
You brought up a very interesting point that we as born Ahmadis should also go through that thought process and that belief and faith in Allah Ta'ala that he is the sole provider for us. And if we go through that conscious thinking and we develop that love for Allah Ta'ala in our lives, we can potentially go through the same experience that you went through.
Maybe not. But the question is, he is your friend, but are you his, right? And whenever you have a friendship with someone, you're always looking to improve that friendship, right? And some of the members of the panel, of the audience, you're also married, right? So you're always looking for ways to improve your marriage, right? You got your cars outside, you always want it to run better, right? So you're always looking to improve something, right? So if he is your friend, then number one, are you his? Number two is, how do you improve it? You read the stories and you hear the stories of people who have what seems to you these incredible dialogues with God, where God actually speaks to him. Does he speak to you? Right? Do you have those stories to tell? And can you have that? And if you can, why wouldn't you do whatever it took to have that?
Okay, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, life after becoming Ahmadi Muslims. More with our guests in just a moment.
An interlingual channel promoting interfaith dialogue, worldwide, live and interactive, on satellite television and the internet. This is MTA International.
Welcome back to this episode of Real Talk USA. We've been talking with our dear brothers, Jason Elsie, Hassan Hakim, and Hamza Ilyas, about their unique journeys to Ahmadiyyat. Mr. Elsie, you just signed the Bai'at form. How do you feel?
Excited, nervous, and realizing I have a long journey. So I realize that every time I finish reading a book, every time I talk to a member of the Jama'at on where I've come from and how much farther I have to go.
And your journey just started very recently, and it seems like you're implying that the journey doesn't end. It just is continuing.
No, it's a never-ending journey, which is great when I come to Shura and different events where I'm able to talk to different members from all over the place. And no matter how old, they're still learning. So that's for me, that's phenomenal, because I'm all about learning the next step. How can I develop a closer relationship with God?
You know, we were talking a bit before, and I learned that you were an altar boy.
Yes.
And, you know, after you became Ahmadi, you know, that must have been, you know, talk a little bit about your family's reaction to that.
So when I first introduced the idea to my family, it was kind of in passing. They came to visit, and I said, yeah, so just so you know, I'm looking at becoming a Muslim. They go, what? I go, yeah, well, I'm looking into it. I'll let you know if I find something that's weird or let you know my progress. So before I convert, I'll talk with you guys. And that's why it took a week from talking to that employee to me actually signing the bet, was I followed through with that and talked with them, and they said, okay. So here, the culture's a little different on raising children. Once they get to a certain age, 18, you're out of the house, you're on your own. We did the best we could, good luck. So they followed through with that mentality, and you know, I feel that they did a pretty good job on raising me with a good judgment and things of that nature, so.
Right. Yeah, that just ongoing journey.
You know, they actually, we had a picnic with the Jama'at, and I invited my parents, and this was after I converted. And it was within a couple of months of me converting, and I said, why don't you guys come? They said, all right, yeah, we'll go. So they were able to meet all the different members of the Jama'at, and after that, they had no issues. It was nice for them to put faces with names. I took them past the mosque where I go every Friday. I said, so when I say I'm going to prayers on Friday, now you know where I go. It gave them a visualization of the people there, who I was associating with, the places I was going. For them, that was key.
Yeah. And just to anybody who wants to answer this next question, but you know, obstacles. Now that you've joined this new community, you know, you're like the new kid at the new school, so to speak. You know, are there any obstacles that you've faced, or and how did you approach those obstacles?
You know, it's very interesting, and that's a good question. Because throughout my life, different jobs that I've had, I've always had to face that obstacle. The one that was most amusing to me was when I was, during my journalistic period, I was a journalist for about 7 years. And I wrote a pretty tough column in my community. And one lady wrote to me and she said, who is this Negro with the nom de plume of Hassan Hakim? And why is he working for you? So it just, I then realized that this was never going to stop. But in actuality, it has tapered off as I've gotten older and people get to understand that I'm consistent with who I am, that when I talk in terms of my faith, they're my actions, and they aren't separate and distinct from each other. There's this merging that has taken place over the years. And that began with that bayat, and signing that bayat, and then reaffirming and understanding that bayat every year of my life. Excuse me.
Within the Jama'at itself, I mean,
within the Jama'at, it has been just one of activity after activity. I've always been very busy within the Jama'at. I was the president of a Jama'at when I was 19, and I've been the president 4 or 5 times over. So to me, it's the activity that really.
Is there any challenges that you have faced? You know, we heard from Hamza that he had to give up a way of life to enter a new way of life. But there's also cultural aspects, right?
You're right.
Putting the religious aspects aside.
No, you're right. There are cultural aspects.
Integration. How do we integrate as, you know, predominantly Pakistani background in America, for example?
Right. And this has been a huge problem, actually, the cultural aspect. But for me, it wasn't that big of a problem because, yeah, maybe they might be better able to explain because it wasn't a big problem.
It wasn't a big problem because I accept people for who they are. So that was part of my upbringing anyway. So who you are is great with me. I like who I am. The only thing, I was questioned this by members of the Jama'at, and they said, is there anything that we do that sets you off? I said, no, not really. I said, okay, one thing, hugs. So hugs are okay, and I'm growing more accustomed to them, and it was nice. But it was just one of those things that was the only thing that could come to mind. Everything else is, I accept everybody for who they are.
Mr. Elias, you mentioned this spiritual family. You're part of this new spiritual family. And, the current members of the new community that you're now a part of, that puts a lot of responsibility on them, because they may be your new family. They may be the only family that the new convert has. How important is it for us to reach out to these new converts and welcome them in our homes, invite them over, sit with them in the Jama'at meetings, and not, and just to make an extra effort to do that? Is that something that you see happening, or is that something that we can improve on doing?
Well, everybody's different. It reminds me of when, if anyone has any sisters or aunts, which I'm sure some of us do, right? So like, your sister or your aunt has a new baby, right? Everybody wants to go visit the new baby and hold them, right? We love to say azan in their ear and the iqamat in the other ear, right? So everyone wants to go visit the baby and everything, right? They say that when someone becomes a Muslim, all of their previous sins are forgiven as if they had just been born, right? So do we not go and visit children when they're just born? Do we not make an extra effort to take care of them, right? Islam tells us the same thing.
So in a way, the new converts are our children, in a sense, that we have a responsibility to take care of them and make them a part of our family, a part of our lives.
We have a responsibility to take care of each other. No person gets left behind. This is the message of Islam.
You mentioned a child being born. The date that you signed the initiation form to becoming Ahmadi, that date is very interesting, an interesting date. Kind of explain that to us.
This date is, I particularly mentioned this to you because this was the date that I was born, actually, in real life, right? And it was the date that I was born again for our Christian friends. In terms of my signing the bayat, it's also very interesting for me because, one of the times that my family being unable to cope with my embracing Islam, because again, it was not too long after September 11th, it's 2004, so there was a lot of misunderstanding about what Islam is and so forth and so on. So I was given a choice, either to leave, right? And this also was June 2nd, 2006. And so I decided to just leave. And it made me, think twice later on because I realized I had nowhere else to go. So I had been homeless for almost a year, and that's why the date always stuck in my mind because of those 3 points. It's the day that I was born, it's the day that I was born again, having signed by it, it's the day that I was put out of my home, and the day, as they say, I wandered in the desert for about a year. But alhamdulillah, I would never do it differently.
There's a few folks who are still new. I guess you can still consider them new converts. They've been here for about 3 or 4 years, but yet we really don't know who they are. What can we as a Jama'at do to extend our hand even further without having to, without pushing their comfort zone to, to something where they're uncomfortable?
Don't you love introducing yourself to people, right? Like you have a job, and you see somebody who's new come onto your job. Do you just walk by them by the water fountain and act like you don't see them, or do you say, "Oh, hi, so-and-so, my name is," and then say, "I see you're new here," right? And then over time, you kind of feel it out, right? If you talk, sometimes you'll talk to them, you observe them. In other words, you pay attention to them, right? And then you'll learn what your boundaries are in terms of the levels of your interaction with them. Do the same thing.
Mr. Elsie, do you have anything to add to that, being that you're the most recent person who has accepted Ahmadiyya?
I'm showered with affection. I'm fortunate there. So me being the new convert in Columbus, AMLA meetings, and everybody knows who I am and things of that nature. Now, I'd like to ask the audience, how does it work in a larger Jama'at setting with more families? Do you have new converts that just get lost kind of in the shuffle, or?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge, obviously, that has been talked about is not paying attention. It's very, very important when a person comes in and he feels alone, even though he comes to masjid, but still he feels alone because no one walks up to them and hugs them, which is actually a nice gesture to show your love for the other person.
I appreciate that. I do. I'm coming around to that, yeah.
That's the intention behind it. But making friends and really bringing them, making them part of your life as a friend is I think, the most important thing to do. And it has to be said that it's not only true for the converts, it is true for any member of Jama'at in general. As a human being, we all are hungry for that attention and for that love. So no matter where we are, if we show that basic decency of being a human being and being open to others, that goes a long way.
My own opinion on this is I think there is room for improvement there. And I think it's from Ahmadis who were born Ahmadis or who are even converts, but who have been with the Jama'at for a long time. In some ways, I think we become complacent in the system, which alhamdulillah works by the grace of God to integrate all of us into positive ways of working. As you're saying, you're very busy with the Jama'at. But sometimes, as a president and as other office holders, those who are part of the system and well integrated and mashallah very active, I think almost there needs to be an effort to step back and not miss the forest of the trees. And which is as new members or inactive members of the Jama'at, right? We need to not only hug and embrace, but we need to find, in larger Jama'ats, I think it is an issue, right? I think in the larger Jama'ats, it's hard to identify where, a Jama'at of 300, 500, 1,000 people, where different people are. I think there needs to be an effort, in my opinion.
If I could just point something out, because it just dawned on me here, like somebody just pointed out, all of our brothers in the panel are from Pakistan, right? And I will mention something that never really hit home with me until December, when I was traveling through Europe. And on the way from Germany into Gatwick, we were arrested. It was 3 of us. It was myself, a Bangladeshi, and a Pakistani. He's Danish, but he's Pakistani, right? So all of us 3 are Ahmadis, and so when we came in at the airport, we were arrested and detained for 9 hours. Now, we did what any group of Ahmadis would do when held by their special agents, their Scotland Yard, for that long a period. We tablighed them for the full 9 hours without fail until they were so exasperated. They were just too happy to see us leave. But interestingly enough, they congratulated us and shook our hands and took pictures with us after it was done. So when I came back to New York, I thought about this. And you know what I realized relating to this issue here? There's a cultural difference. Pakistanis or people from the subcontinent, their culture sometimes is a little bit aloof, right? We already know the language difference, right? The cultural difference. So you've got these African Americans, these white Americans, or, and so everybody has their own culture different. But what I realized particularly, and I think it's a reminder with the martyrdoms in Pakistan last year, this month, right? One thing that people have to remember, we all have to remember, Allah says, Kuntum khaira ummatin ukhrijat linas. You are the best people raised for the good of mankind. Our brothers all over the world, we go through such a difficult time. And let me tell you, at times like that, wouldn't an Ahmadi face, whether he's a pitch black Nigerian or a bright white Australian, or maybe Norwegian, I don't know, he's an Ahmadi. She's an Ahmadi. These are your family members. These are the people who are going to help you and take you in. These are the people here in the Jama'at. And when things get bad, when things get tough, it's going to be that Ahmadi. We've heard the stories about the families and this and that, but Ahmadis, this is what makes our hearts, right, or bleed for each other. This is my Ahmadi brother. I've traveled so many places. People I don't even know meet me at airports, take me into their homes. This is the brotherhood. What it actually is a love for God. So particularly with the Ahmadi piece, I mean, let me put it back on you now, right? You come from a different country over here, right? How did that feel? Your parents came over here from a different country. Many of them didn't even speak the language. How did that feel? I'd like to know about that. Tell me about that. Is there one among you?
From my perspective, that's a big integration, that's a big identity crisis that you go through, coming from Pakistan to the United States of America. As I came as a young child, you take some time to find that do you fit in, and you don't necessarily fit in. So yes, you have a very good point. I mean, it's that initial shock and adjustment. And it takes some time to find, just like finding your way in your religion, it takes some time to find your way in fitting in just into society. It's a different way of living in America than it was in Pakistan.
Yeah, I think we had a comment on this side too. Anybody?
So you see, once a new convert accepts Ahmadiyya, then he comes into the fold of a new way of thinking, a new way of thought. So it's a complete transformation from his old ways of thinking and coming into something which he thinks is right for him. So it's an entire struggle in itself, for a person, in its personality. So how, like, the existing members of Jama'at can help a new convert to oversee this struggle and can help him to oversee that period of struggle.
It's really an amazing thing for a convert, that you're allowed to meet this person, the Khalifa. But then when you take on assignments that come through Khilafat, it gets even better. I noticed that this last Jalsa Salana in Bangladesh, there was an African American representing the United States. He was the only representative, and this man here came out of the prisons. He's a convert that came through the prisons. And here he is, representing the United States at the Jalsa Salana in Bangladesh. Alhamdulillah. This is Khilafat. This is a great evidence of how wonderful this Jama'at is.
Can you talk a little bit about the Jalsa? You just briefly mentioned Jalsa. Your experiences, and I'm sure you've visited either U.S. Jalsa, but many around the world. How does that, tell us some of your experiences about Jalsa Salana.
It's a good question, because the Jalsa Salanas are wonderful. Again, as an early convert, I didn't understand this Jalsa Salana experience. For me, it was like, oh my God, what are all these people doing listening to these long, dull speeches? Do they have a bowling alley nearby? Yeah, this is what I got to look for the rest of my life. But through time and participating in the Jalsa Salana, and eventually giving a speech in a Jalsa Salana, that I came to appreciate the Jalsa Salanas, not only in the United States, but in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa. And to me, the greatest experience that I've ever had was the Jalsa Salana in Africa when we were celebrating 100 years, the Jubilee. It was just a wonderful time.
All right, I'd like to take it back to the audience for any final comments, and if there are questions, if you can incorporate those questions into your final comments. Yes?
I have a question for Hamza Ilyas Saab and Hassan Hakim Saab. And again, this is my experience. This may not be accurate, but I have noticed a number of African Ahmadi families, in fact, African Ahmadis who have converted to Ahmadi, but they haven't managed to bring their families into Ahmadiyya. I mean, I know a number of African Ahmadi brothers who live in Philadelphia, but their children, they are not Ahmadis. Their wives are not Ahmadis. So what do you think would be the reason for that?
This is one of the problems of when you accept Ahmadiyya as an African American. Possibly your wife doesn't accept with you. My wife was a Jehovah's Witness. I did not force her to accept Ahmadiyya. I became the example for her, And eventually, alhamdulillah, she left the Jehovah's Witness faith and became an Ahmadi, as she is today. And the children didn't all become Ahmadis. That's part of the problem here that we face in America.
So how can you fix that?
The only way you can fix it is to continue to present the best example of Ahmadiyya and bring those families whenever you can to picnics, as you did, Jason. I think you said there was a picnic. And bring them to some of the events that we have. But don't force anything on. It can't be that heavy-handed experience.
And do this in conjunction with prayer. First of all, it is God that opens up people's hearts for Ahmadiyya, right?
Absolutely.
So you had the promised Messiah, alayhi salatu wasalam, you know, his children that converted later on, and he's a prophet of God. So it's God that opens up the hearts of the people. So, but, you know, to Hassan Hakim's point, though, there also has to be a practical aspect of it. You can pray all day long, but what are you going to do about it, right?
Right.
So it's a conjunction of both. But one should, you know, one should plant one's seeds, the practical effort, and then you should water it. It should be begun. Should be started with prayer, prayer throughout, and prayer all until it comes about, and then prayer after they do it.
Yeah. This is difficult for an Asian and for an African. I have an African friend who married an African-American woman, and they are going through it. It is a big problem for him because his is kind of like, well, I'm a Muslim, so my children should be Muslims. But it doesn't work that way. The wife is not a Muslim. So now you begin to understand how important it is to marry someone within your faith who believes the same thing that you believe. So he has this problem now, but I've advised him, don't push it. And I've advised him with prayer and patience. And it will be his example that really sets the tone.
Let's go to our
one thing I would just also say, though, this is a very important point because everybody claims to be something, right? So the Buddhist is claiming to be a Buddhist and the Muslim is claiming to be a Muslim, and the same for the Christians and everyone else. The idolater, he's the only one who doesn't say, well, I'm an idol worshiper, right? So he's the exception, right? But the thing is, the Prophet answered this, go for people's righteousness, right? Because the person who has a righteous heart, they may be anything, but that's a person who's likely to come into Islam, right? Whether righteousness. So this is an important point. People should marry people based upon practical demonstrations of righteousness. You should look for that first. And then families and this, that, and the third. If somebody's already married, right, then this just shows them. It reminds me of that old 30s film, right, where the man walks into the place and they say, well, we need to find out the character of your home before we send the nurses to your home. He says, I am the character of my home, right? So what happens is the person should be the character of their home if they're already married, because they're looking at that person. That man's family sees him every day. So he can show up to any community and put on whatever act he wants to. But when he comes home, they're seeing what he's really like. That's the importance of actually living the values.
I want to say again that I appreciate all your comments and being here today, joining us. Mr. Ellis, if you can start with your final comment, and we'll just go down the line after that.
Thank you for having me here. I appreciate everybody listening and asking questions. It was a pleasure to meet the other panelists up here and talk and be able to express my thoughts and ideas.
Mr. Hakim?
Simply, this has been a great experience. I enjoyed this Real Talk. I've watched it, and I think you guys are doing a tremendous job. One thing I would like to say is that we have many obstacles that we're trying to overcome in the United States of America. It is difficult practicing your faith here, but you've got to remain firm. You've got to hunker down, and every now and then you've got to take a look at that bayat and remind yourself of what that's all about.
And finally, Mr. Ilyas.
I just wanted to say that Jazakallah, thank you for having me here. And I think the message when it comes to the conversion of any individual, whether they are already a Muslim or an Ahmadi Muslim or not, is prayer and humility. This is the two most important aspects that can always be developed further, prayer and humility. All things come about through prayer and humility.
All right, I want to thank our guests again for joining us and sharing their personal stories. They've been very inspirational. For more inspirational stories, check out the book By the Dawn's Early Light, which can be found at the USA Jama'at bookstore. Also, thanks to our live studio audience who has joined the conversation, and you at home for watching. You can also visit us online at real-talk.tv. Thanks again. We'll see you next time, and keep it real.